London, 1888. The smog clings to the cobblestones like a bad perfume. The gas lamps flicker. The streets of Whitechapel whisper of something darker. A killer walks amongst them. But who was Jack the Ripper? A surgeon with a grudge? A disgraced royal? A Freemason with a flair for theatre? Or was he, like most internet comment sections, just a myth with too many Reddit theories? Welcome to Probably Not True. Tonight we're slicing through Victorian fog and internet nonsense to figure out just who really might have been behind history's most overhyped murder mystery. Let's start with what we do know. August 31st and November 9th, 1888 is the time period. 5 women were murdered in London's East End, specifically in and around Whitechapel, a district known at the time for overcrowding, poverty and crime. These women were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. Now they're commonly referred to as the Canonical Five. Why canonical? No, they're not saints. Because even in murder, Victorian London couldn't resist being pretentious. All 5 were women struggling to survive in a city that was indifferent at best and hostile at worst. Most were involved in sex work or transient labour. All were vulnerable, and their killings weren't just violent, they were methodical, surgical and theatrical. Throats were slit, organs removed, and in Mary Jane Kelly's case, mutilation on a level that even seasoned detectives struggled to process. This wasn't just murder, this was performance art. It really shocked Victorian society, it titillated the press, and ignited a tabloid frenzy that has never really ended. Then came the letter, signed from hell, sent to Central News Agency, complete with half a human kidney. Therefore, the legend of Jack the Ripper was born. A name crafted not by the police, but by the media, hungry for headlines and terrified of empty columns. And that infamous letter might not even have been real. Some think it was written by a hoaxer, some say it was the work of a bored journalist chasing circulation, some say it was written by the killer himself, licking the envelope and sealing his place in history with a flourish of blood and ink. And some, rightly, suggest it might have been a total fabrication, Victorian trolling. After all, the press was printing wild speculations on an almost daily basis. What's one more corpse of a catchy name? This is where it gets messy. And by messy, we mean Victorian tabloid fever dream. Let's talk some suspects, shall we? Number 1. The surgeon theory. The murders were brutal, but weirdly precise. Throats were slashed, organs removed, with apparent anatomical precision and knowledge. This has led many to think that maybe Jack was a surgeon, or a butcher, or someone with just enough medical training to be dangerous. Maybe a doctor, maybe a midwife, maybe that one bloke in the pub who always brags about dissecting frogs in school and never really peaked after that. But here's the thing, Precise is doing a lot of heavy lifting. The 1880s didn't exactly have CSI. One coroner saying that this looks surgical doesn't mean a royal pathologist did it. It might just mean that Jack had a steady hand and a very weird hobby. Number 2. Prince Albert Victor. Ah yes, royalty, because if there's a mysterious unsolved crime, someone always thinks the Windsors are involved. Now this theory claims that Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, fell in love with a Catholic sex worker, married her in secret, and fathered a child. Naturally this could never be allowed, so the story goes that everyone involved was dealt with. The Ripper murders? One giant royal cover-up. Which raises the obvious question of why would the British Crown silence witnesses via high-profile, grotesque serial killings that ignited a media circus? That's like trying to quietly fire someone by launching a fireworks display into their office, but, you know, conspiracy theory logic and whatnot. Number 3. The Freemasons. Secret handshakes, aprons, ritual daggers, you know the drill. The idea here is that several figures in the investigation were Freemasons, and the murderers may have included Masonic symbolism like specific body positioning or cryptic messages that other Freemasons would recognise. Some versions go full-on Da Vinci Code. This claims that the killings were ritual sacrifices, part of an internal Masonic power struggle or an attempt to cleanse London's streets. Naturally, this theory also includes police cover-ups, missing files and coded languages in the letters. It also includes zero proof. But it sounds mysterious, and that's half the battle. Number 4 is H.H. Holmes. Try saying that 20 times. Now this is America's first known serial killer, famous for the murder castle in Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair. So what's he doing in East London 5 years earlier? Well, according to some, he popped over to test out his killing techniques before he returned to the US to build the Horror Hotel. If you haven't looked up the Horror Hotel, by the way, I would recommend it. I might do an episode on it. Because international travel was so casual and undocumented back then, of course. Never mind that there's no evidence that Holmes ever left North America, or that his methods were wildly different. But why would you let facts get in the way of a good Netflix or podcast pitch? Now, number 5. The woman theory, or sometimes called Jill the Ripper. What if the killer wasn't a man at all, but a woman, possibly a midwife, who could carry bloody clothing and tools without suspicion? Midwives had anatomical knowledge, access, and freedom of movement in areas where the murders occurred. It's one of the very few theories that actually fits in the timeline, the methods, and the geography. Which is probably why nobody talks about it, because, sexism. It turns out Mysterious Gentleman in a Top Hat is just a more marketable brand than overworked Victorian woman doing the unspeakable deeds. Now, as it's episode 10 as well, and I do love this subject, I wanted to do some really wild ones and some really out there theories. We've covered the reasonable suspects, the rogue royals, the dodgy doctors, and midwives with suspicious knife collections. But let's go full on Victorian fever dream for a second. This is where the Jack the Ripper theories truly rip. They aren't just left field, they're in a completely different stadium. Number 1. Jack the Time Traveller. Yes, you heard that right. One of the wilder takes suggests that Jack wasn't from the 1800s. He was visiting, possibly from the future, possibly another dimension, possibly from a particularly edgy episode of Doctor Who. Proponents argue that Jack's anatomical precision, his ability to vanish down cobbled streets, and the way the killings just kind of stopped all of a sudden, point to time travel. The logic is, he finished his mission and zipped away in his meat-powered DeLorean. Of course, this does ignore basic things like evidence, but, if you believe in a time machine, you can forgive a few missing sources. But then there's the alien twist, because if humans can't figure out how he pulled it off, maybe he wasn't one. An extraterrestrial researcher doing fieldwork on Victorian organs, why not? Earth is the galaxy's weirdest internship. Number 2. The occult blood ritual theory. According to this theory, Jack wasn't just killing, he was summoning people. The arrangement of the bodies allegedly aligned with ley lines, the missing organs, ingredients in an ancient magical rite. The location, London, the spiritual heart of Victorian Empire, and apparently, demon cuisine. Maybe Jack wasn't fleeing the scene. Maybe he was just waiting for the moon to rise and the blood sigil to charge. Because when you want to live forever, why not do a back alley spleen heist? Bonus points. Some believers think that the final murder was the ritual's completion, a sacrificial climax that unlocked supernatural power. Or maybe he was just escalating. Tomato, tomato. One theory floats, and quite literally you'll find out in a second, that Jack was already dead. An angry spirit, a revenant, a cursed soul doomed to relive his rage, skiving through Whitechapel like an incorporeal serial killer with commitment issues. Why couldn't the police catch him? Well, ghosts don't leave footprints, silly. They don't buy train tickets, and they certainly don't confess. Supporters of this idea point to reports of eerie sensation in the murder locations, sudden chills, flickering gas lamps, and strange sounds in the fog. But that could also be London in November. Still, you have to admire the ghost theory. It solves everything by explaining nothing. The artistic statement theory. Performance art. We love performance art. If there's one thing more mysterious than murder, it's modern art. This theory claims Jack wasn't driven by rage or pathology, but by aesthetic intent. The killings were political, symbolic, a grotesque critique of poverty, power, and urban decay. Like Banksy, but if Banksy murdered people instead of using spray paint. No one is quite sure what the statement was, but apparently slicing organs out of impoverished women was his way of drawing attention to the plight of the working class. In which case, Jack, mate, maybe try a leaflet next time. Number 5. Jack was multiple people. This is known as the Ripper Syndicate theory, and weirdly is one of the more plausible out there ideas. What if Jack wasn't one singular man, but many Jack the Rippers? A coordinated group, possibly tied to a secret society, a medical institution, or just a very angry book club. Each member commits one murder, throwing off the police with inconsistencies in methods, motives, and timings. A decentralised killer collective. Perfect strangers. Strangers on a train. Like a dark, murderous Google Doc with shared access. It's narratively neat, and it fits the gap, but it does also require Victorian conspiracy with perfect silence, total precision, and zero snitching. So unless it was run by the Victorian Batman, it's probably not true. No, Jack the Ripper wasn't just a murderer, he was a viral sensation, one of the first to go viral. If you can call it that when it involves Victorian broadsheets and hand-drawn entrails, of course. In 1888, London's press was in a frenzy, and Jack was just the gift that kept on giving. A brutal mystery, a faceless villain, a steady stream of escalating horror. Every paper wanted the scoop, and every detail was exaggerated. Letters were forged, eyewitnesses appeared out of fog and thin air, and suddenly murder had a new brand identity. It wasn't about finding the killer anymore, it was about selling him. The story fed every fear of the age, the growing divide between the rich and poor, the crumbling faith in the police, the anxiety over women's independence and urban anonymity, the seedy underbelly of empire exposed with every corpse, and the victims, often reduced to footnotes, sensationalised or sanitised, depending on the audience of course. Sex workers when it was scandalous, fallen women when it needed more moral weight. The press didn't just report on Jack the Ripper, they created him, they named him, crafted him, shaped him, elevated him into legend. And when the murders stopped, the myth only grew. No arrest meant no ending, just a question mark. Questions that conspiracy theorists, historians, and people sat at 2 o'clock in the morning at their desks recording podcasts have been answering ever since. Why does this myth persist? Well, Jack the Ripper refuses to stay buried, not because of what we know, but because of the unknown. In a world obsessed with answers, Jack is a seductive void. He's a perfect conspiracy canvas. The man's got no identity, the man's got no motive, no resolution, just enough gore to be unforgettable, and just enough mystery to stay marketable. The Ripper myth survives because it offers something for everyone. True crime junkies get a Victorian cold case, conspiracy theorists get a royal scandal, a Masonic plot, or a time-travelling ghost surgeon midwife. Historians get to argue about letters, timelines, and top hats. TV producers get endless documentaries with moody lighting and fog machines. There's also something just primal about it. It taps into real fears, anonymity, violence, class divides, institutional failure, but it's distant enough in time and space to feel safe. It's like a haunted house you pay to walk through. And, let's be honest, we love a villain with branding, we love a catchy name, a costume, even if it's just speculation, you know, the top hat. A calling card. Jack the Ripper was true crime's first anti-celebrity. Every unsolved mystery since has lived in the man's shadow, because Jack isn't just a killer. He's a whole franchise, he's a cinematic universe. So, where does this sit? Well, on the probably not true believability index, the Jack the Ripper conspiracies are 6.6 out of 10 blood-stained fog banks. The murders? Undeniably real. The hysteria? Off the Victorian charts. The royal cover-ups, Masonic hit squad, time-travelling ghost surgeon. Well, let's just say the mystery survives because it suits everyone. When a story has this many gaps, it's only natural we keep stuffing them full of speculation. Thanks for listening to Probably Not True, the podcast that pokes around in the shadows, lifts the floorboards of history, and occasionally screams, "Maybe it was the Queen!" into the London fog. If you like this episode, please follow the show, leave a review wherever podcasts still allow human opinions, and check out the Patreon for bonus content and extra conspiracy chaos every Friday. New full episodes drop every Monday, and somewhere, Jack the Ripper is probably still trending. Until next time, think critically, question the story, and maybe don't trust anyone who definitely thinks they've solved this one. Next time on Probably Not True, we all remember the rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. What if there were more? What if there were hidden wives, secret annulments, political cover-ups? Join us as we dig into the tangled love life of Henry VIII, because apparently, 6 just wasn't enough.